Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, everyone. Pardon me. I got to get the time zones right this morning. It's good to see everyone come on this morning. Welcome to the Building Knowledge Critical Canadian Building Science webinar series. This session is supported by Enbridge. Susan Cudahy with us this morning. Give everyone a chance to get online there. I see, Brett, you can hop over into the attendees. You'll see the folks that are on there. Well, I was just talking to some of the team at Enercan out of Ottawa, and they had sunny skies there as well too. So maybe we've got like a cross-province day of sun once in a while. What's it like for you, Brett? Sunny up there?
Yeah, pretty good, pretty sunny, a little taste of winter, but sunny winter at least.
Yeah, sunny but cold. There you are. Good. All right. Well, we will go ahead and get started. I see we still have folks hopping online there. So Brett, thanks for joining us today. Welcome everybody to the Critical Canadian Building Science series by Building Knowledge, supported by Enbridge. This one is a update on the Canadian Home Builders Net Zero Home Program. Brett, what is this? The marvelous 5 to 6 year anniversary? Is that what it is?
Yeah, I guess so. Surpassing that 1,000 home mark is always something to celebrate. So yeah, I guess we call it the 5+ year anniversary.
Yeah, very cool. Well, thanks for joining us. We had heard a little bit of the report that you and the team at CHBA had developed for and delivered at the big national meeting out in Banff. And so thanks for joining us today. There's some really good stuff that came out of there, really cool lessons learned. So good. Okay. Susan Cudahy. Susan, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and welcome everyone who's joining us for this workshop. Great information. Just want to start it off with our traditional acknowledgement. And we, as Enbridge and all of us participating today, would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional and historical lands of the original people of Turtle Island, who have been the caretakers of these lands since time immemorial. So today, this gathering place is home to many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And our acknowledgement of this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources of and the relationship to Indigenous people, and we have a true responsibility to honor that. So we'll go on to the next slide.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you. Want to take a quick safety minute here on job site cleanliness. We've had we were talking about some of the weather here. We've been having some wonky on again, off again, wet, snow, ice situations, and it's been an unfortunate first quarter for Enbridge. We've had some really serious critical accidents, life-changing accidents for some of our employees on job sites in the first quarter. So just a quick reminder, please, we want to make sure all of our people that are there providing you natural gas service get home safe at the end of the day, as I'm sure all of you want all of the same for your employees. So when we're coming out, and even for the safety of your own people, just make sure that you take some time to make sure the wood, the other buildings, scaffolding, any types of garbage or spills, anything that could be hidden under snow, which was a situation we've been experiencing, drywall and that type of thing become projectiles if you step on them when they're on top of ice. And the outcomes, like I said, can be life-changing for people. So just a quick reminder on job site cleanliness, and we'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Stacey. Just a quick reminder to everybody out there, builders and HVACs, you know that we're going to be coming to install please remember to mark your meter location. So it really helps us and you to sort of avoid any sort of delays or ending up with a meter in the wrong spot. You know, please mark where you want the meter installed. Just a little inverted T, and bottom of the horizontal line lets us know the level of the final grade, and the vertical upright line indicates the meter riser location. So greatly appreciated. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Andy.
Thanks, Susan, very, very much. And thanks for those reminders today too. All right, so a little introduction of our good friend, Mr. Brett Cass. I actually found this sort of cool. I never realized Brett went to school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Spent a little time south of the border. So Brett has his bachelor's of environmental science. Brett was the first and is the longstanding technical manager for the net zero energy housing program and projects at Canadian Home Builders. So Brett, you've done you're a certified energy manager, your REA, your Lead Green Associate, all these things. I've often found it very cool that, you know, you understand the work that even we, some of us geeks at Building Knowledge, do, because you've done it yourself. So it's good to have you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. It's certainly a pleasure to speak here today.
So folks, as we get started into our webinar today, just remember, if you have questions for Brett, and I do want you to pepper him with questions, put them in the Q&A. I'll stop Brett every once in a while. If we start to see lots of questions, we'll have a little chat. And then at the end of the day, we'll leave a little 10 to 15 minutes to answer some questions. So those goes in the Q&A so we can track them and answer them. If you have any technical questions, please put those over in the chat. And that's where you'll see that that Stacy Cooper can sort of help you out there. Stacy is part of our Building Knowledge team and monitors things in the background and is responsible for making us all look good today. So real quick, you're good Canadians, so remember, considerate, thoughtful, respectful in the chat. We have some good conversations. It's always good to have a little bit of good tension and some back and forth, but make sure it is friendly and considerate. There is a survey that will come out right after the presentation, and please take a minute, fill it out, get it back to us. Just a reminder too, many of you would know the presentation that we're doing today, Brett has been very generous to tell us he's going to share the presentation with us. So you'll receive a PDF of Brett's presentation. Brett, the information you give though is part of a broader report, is it not? Like a longer report with a lot of information, is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is the highlights of our 2022 report, and the final report will be published in April. We're just crossing the T's and dotting our I's on final review, but these are some of the highlights we can chat about.
Very good, very good. And for those of you that are interested or this can help, we do offer closed captioning. It is enabled. So just look in, it's between the record and the reaction buttons at the bottom of most of your screens. Quick reminder, we have spring training. This is the Advanced Building Science and Practical Application mashup event with Brett and Sonia and the team at CHBA and the Net Zero Home Summit. So that summit now has been, what is this? I think it's the 4th or 5th year, maybe 6th year of the Net Zero Summit as well. And it's a mashup event, 2 events coming together, and it's 3 solid long days. All I'm going to say is make sure you drink lots of caffeine, because there's going to be a whole lot of content. Some of the things you're going to hear about is decarbonization strategies that builders are using. You're going to get a little update even from our helpers, our researchers that work at NRCan on this. They're going to give the builders a little bit update of where some of the codes are going. You're going to learn about air and water systems. We're going to talk about, interactive grid communities. There's going to be, some load management stuff for communities, historical retrofits. Brett and Sonia team are going to be doing a lot of updates too on some of the net zero renovation programs, some of the LEED programs. And then we've got some guests. We've got John Straub's doing a full half day on carbon and construction. We've got a distinguished ASHRAE lecturer, Robert Bean. Mr. Robert Bean coming to do a sort of almost a keynote on exergy and why we are not using our potential brains to solve the problems we have, and he'll explain why exergy is sort of the ultimate goal and more. So before we hop into the session with Brett, this is the agenda. Brett's going to hop on. He's going to take us till around 2 o'clock. We'll have some Q&A. Before we get started, folks, though, get your Zoom fingers ready. Real quick, let's run the poll. Tell us where you're located. It's like watching a horse race, Brett. That's very cool. Let's see if we've got, let's see how many provinces and territories we have represented today. I've got some folks from the US as well. Got some Ontario, got some Manitoba, Alberta, British Columbia. Yeah, very nice. Good cross section. Thanks for that. Good deal. Okay, let's run to the next poll. Find out who these folks are that are online. And again, this is very helpful to us folks. It's very helpful to Enbridge, to Brett and the team at CHBA as well, as to who does dial in, what's of interest. Builders, lots of builders and developers. Got some mechanical designers, sales reps, consultants. Folks, if you don't find yourself on this list, feel free to put it over in the chat and tell us what you do. Some site supervisors too. Isn't that cool? And of all of us that are involved in some of this, there are still people that actually have to build it, right? Like, good to have those folks on. All right. Thanks, Stacy, for that very much. And why don't we move to the next one? And this is the last poll before we bring Brett on. Brett and team were very interested, if you could, to think about these labeling programs that are out there. Zero Ready, the CHBA program, Energy Star, EnerGuide, R2000, Greenbill Canada, you name it, all these per lead, the Passive House, all of these. Do they help builders achieve higher levels of performance? Do volunteer programs help? Obviously, we'd like to think they do, but it'd be interesting to get your opinion. Oh, very good. Thank you for that. Thanks, Stacy. Good. All right. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Brett, away you go.
Perfect. Great. I will share my presentation here. Let me know when it's showing.
You're on live. There you
Perfect.
go.
All right. Well, I guess I'll start saying thanks to the Building Knowledge team for having me. We're certainly happy at the CHBA to be over 1,000 homes at this point, and that's large in part to some of our EAs. I know EAs and builders, and Building Knowledge in particular has been a large part of that, a big chunk of that 1,000. So certainly happy to be here and share some of the highlights from our 2022 report. So I'll get right into it. And as Andy mentioned, if you do have questions, certainly feel free to ask, and we can chat about them. So my agenda for this section of the presentation, as I mentioned, we're looking at the north of 1,000 homes that have been labeled in the program up to December 31st, 2022. So that's the by the numbers section. We're also going to look at the different systems in these homes. So the mechanical systems, what envelope performance are these homes achieving, the energy performance of these homes. And we're also going to take a kind of a different approach than I have before in presentations, and look at some of the provinces with the highest numbers and how those homes performed in particular. Because of our large data set, there's 3 provinces that have enough homes that we were confident enough to build a bit of an archetype. So just an interesting approach there to check out some numbers. And then lastly, we're going to talk about some of the industry challenges ahead. We know what kind of high performance codes are coming down the pipe, and what do we feel on the voluntary side needs to change or needs some solutions over the years until we get there on the code side. So I will jump right in and start with the numbers. So a lot of charts in this presentation, so don't feel like you need to screenshot these. They'll be sent out as a PDF afterwards. So this particular chart is the number of homes to date. You have on the left axis there just the quantity of homes. And each bar represents either net zero as the dark green or net zero ready as the light green. Certainly a lot of growth over the years, that's no question. What I find is interesting is that as of about 2020 or so, we're starting to see net zero ready really take off. And that's large in part because of more builders coming on board, production builders coming on board and building large volumes of net zero ready development. So certainly great to see. It seems like net zero ready is the future, with net zero still a very popular option for those that want to add the renewables. What are the types of homes? So broken it up into three categories for this purpose. So we have 1,117. Those are detached and attached homes, but new standard dwellings. That's that group of over 1,000. And then on the MERB side, we actually also have Part 9 MERBs. We have 64 units to date, and that's over 7 different buildings. And then that last group is the renovations. So we have 7 net zero or net zero ready renovations to date. In this presentation, we're largely going to be focusing on that top group, that over 1,000 new homes. And so we'll be looking at the different types of data for those.
Very good. Brett, do you have any sense of where things are going to head over the next year or two as far as those numbers? Do you expect them to go up? Do you expect them to level out? Not to put you in a difficult spot, but.
No, I mean, we do certainly from what we hear anecdotally from our energy advisors, from builders that have been reaching out, from the numbers at our training sessions, we expect the trend to continue to keep going up. So our training has been generally a big tell of what's going to come down the pipe. Often you see builders join the training and it takes a year or two to actually build the home and get the label through for their first label. And our training numbers have been really great, especially over the past year or so.
Very nice. Very cool.
So qualified participants, Andy segued to that nicely. We were at 91 qualified net zero builders. That's as of 2022, a few more certainly coming in at the start of the year. Note that a qualified builder has already built their first home as well. So after they've taken the training, they've also built their first home. We also have 7 qualified net zero renovators, 48 qualified net zero energy advisors, and 13 qualified net zero service organizations across the country. So certainly some good growth in our qualified net zero participants alongside the homes. All right, so moving away from just the general numbers, we're going to start looking at the mechanical systems. And this is the average space heating and cooling systems that are used, as well as the domestic hot water systems. So starting with space heating, we've grouped the configurations on the left there, and the quantity of homes is on the horizontal axis. And this includes both net zero and net zero ready homes. And for the most part, the whole data set for this presentation is both labeled types. And by far the most popular configuration is an air source heat pump plus natural gas. But we're also seeing an air source heat pump with a backup electric furnace as a popular option as well. Some ground source heat pump systems coming online also, and then some baseboard system among some other configurations as well. But it is interesting to note that about 99% of homes are using an air source heat pump as their primary, with a more conventional backup. So with that, a high efficiency backup, but it seems like the air source heat pump is starting to lead the way and be the primary source for heating and cooling as well in these net zero and net zero ready homes.
And also it sort of speaks to the fact that a lot of the distribution system of the heating and cooling is ducted as opposed to non-ducted. I know there's plus and minuses about both depending on the preferences, but it is sort of interesting to see that a lot of it is ducted systems.
Yeah, very true. It's true. All right, so jumping to domestic hot water systems. So what water heating configurations are these homes using? Large in part, I think the word for this is just kind of conventional, high efficiency, but conventional. We're seeing gas instantaneous water heaters. obviously paired up with those gas furnaces in that group of homes. Also seeing just a conventional electric tank, and the heat pump is coming online a bit as well. More heat pumps have come through in 2022, but certainly nothing out of the ordinary on the water heating side of things.
Very cool. It's
So,
interesting to me that the air source heat pump hot water heater is as close to the regular conventional electric tank as it is.
yeah, and I think that is a newer trend in 2021, 2022. It wasn't as high of a percentage in the years past. So something newer that's coming on board. Envelope performance. So in this piece of the presentation, we're specifically going to look at the building envelopes, and we're going to look at it in a variety of metrics. So we're going to talk about air tightness. We're going to talk about some of the envelope improvement percentage metrics. So those are the ones that compare to the reference house. And we're also going to talk about general building assembly. So what are the R values that these builds are often achieving? All right, so to start, this chart looks at the air tightness, and we're measuring air tightness here in air changes per hour at 50 pascals. For those of you that are familiar with our program, we do have a maximum air tightness threshold for detached homes. That's 1.5 air changes per hour, and for attached homes, that is 2.0. And for those with a keen eye, you can see some of the homes actually exceeded those thresholds a little bit. And the reason for that is not only do we have an ACH target, but we also have NLA and NLR targets, which are other air tightness metrics. And they favor different building sizes. So some of the particularly smaller buildings often elect to use an NLA or an NLR target. But in general, we can see here that the detached homes represented in orange seem to hover around that 1 mark or lower, which is pretty good. Anywhere from 0.7 to 1.3 seems to be the average air tightness achieved. And the attached homes is a little bit more spread, but still right around that 1 to 1.1 air changes per hour. So certainly fairly tight buildings are being built here, and we do have some going as low as the 0.3, the 0.5 as well.
Yeah. Would you be comfortable surmising, Brett, that with the attached buildings, from what you understand and have seen and heard, that almost without fail, the attached buildings, the MURBs, the townhomes, that the builders are using a air barrier between the units to compartmentalize, going beyond code to do that?
I don't have that data, Andy. You might be able to speak to that in the experience in your group. I have heard that anecdotally, but I don't have the numbers to match. But what's your
that's interesting. Yeah, I would say that's typically what we see, but those are really good numbers, really all around for attached. And most of the time we do see it's achieved because someone thinks to put an air barrier between the units. So good.
Awesome. So in this chart, we're looking at envelope performance in a different way. This is the envelope improvement over the reference house. And I'm sure most people on the call are familiar with the reference house, but just as a reminder, the reference house represents kind of a code minimum version of the actual home. So the geometry is the same, the assemblies and other pieces would just be brought down to code levels, so that you can compare how much better is your actual home to that of the reference house. So in this chart, we do it in such a way that you're looking at only the envelope improvement over that of the reference house. We have the quantity of homes there on the vertical axis, and then on the horizontal axis we have bars for detached homes as well as attached homes, and that's the percentage. These are 2% buckets as well. I should also mention that in our program we have a minimum threshold of 33% better for the envelope improvement percentage. And that's why the chart starts at 34, but very few homes are down in the 30s. We're seeing that on average, most homes, detached homes in particular, are between that 45 and 55 or so percent better. And the attached homes, a bit of a wider spread too, but are a little bit higher So 55 to 60 or so, 55 to 65 on average. But I thought these are certainly interesting numbers to see that even though we have a minimum threshold, most builders are exceeding that by quite a bit.
Yeah. And for some of the folks that might, or maybe new to net zero, that minimum threshold for the envelope target, that is the efficiency improvement to the home that comes from the air tightness, the insulation of windows versus the code home, not from better mechanicals, right? Just the enclosure elements.
Yeah, exactly. So and we'll talk a little bit about this more at the end of the presentation on a bit of another topic, but you could call that the normalized space heating load. So everything is normalized down to electric baseboards and such, so that you can focus just on the envelope. So it is a normalized metric.
Yeah. And Brett, not to drag this out a little bit, but this new tiered energy code has a total energy reduction target at various tiers, and it also has a envelope target. Do you remember offhand what like the upper tiers were with their envelope performance improvement targets notionally?
Yeah, I know that the envelope of improvement last time I checked was 40% for the fifth tier for tier 5 for the NBC 936, the 2020 codes that recently came out. I wouldn't put too much value on this specific number though, because they're using a metric called gross space heat loss, which is slightly different from what we're using, which is space heating energy load. So they're not apples to apples comparisons, but we'll definitely chat more about that in about 30 minutes or so.
Cool, good.
Great. So staying in the topic of envelope performance, now we're going to look at a metric that most people are probably familiar with, which is R value. So this is the thermal resistance, so the R value of above grade walls, and we're looking at it by climate zone. So climate zone 4 is your warmer climate zone. That's in green there. That's Victoria, Vancouver, moving up through climate zone 5 and in Southern Ontario. Climate zone 6 would be places like Ottawa or St. John, New Brunswick, and climate zone 7 is even colder. Calgary, Edmonton, Saskatoon. We actually have one home that's in climate zone 7B. Our first climate zone 7B home came through this year, but we didn't put it on this chart, obviously, because it's not statistically relevant. But these are called box and whisker charts. So the actual box, if we look at climate zone 4, that green box represents the 25th percentile up to the 75th percentile. And then the lines represent the remaining range. There are a couple outliers that didn't fit into these data sets and are removed from this, so that the scale is relevant, but this represents in the 99% of the home. So the median, the average, is represented by the number in the middle. So what you'd expect as you go up the climate zones is that you'd see a higher R value per climate zone, which is essentially true between climate zone 5, 7A, and it's also true if I add that home from 7B. But the climate zone 4 homes seem to have gone higher. I don't necessarily know the reason for that. I only get the data. But one important piece to note is that there's only 14 homes in that climate zone 4 data set, where there's hundreds in 5 and 6 and 57 in climate zone 7A. So the data set isn't as strong as some of the others. But I did think it was interesting. Those homes are Vancouver, Victoria, which are in BC,
right.
The step code. I know some of these homes might be labeling in other programs like Passive House. So maybe that's a reason, but just ideas on why that climate zone is higher.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it's the only place in Canada that's blooming right now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
Victoria and Vancouver. There you go. Good.
Now the next slide is the ceiling assemblies. So same approach. We're looking at the thermal resistance of ceiling assemblies. If I were to show them in box and whisker, they were relatively tight quartiles. So I'm just showing the average here. So this is the average per climate zone. And this is a more true curve that you'd expect, R48 in climate zone 4, up slightly in 5, up slightly in 6, and then up to R65 and in climate zone 7A. Some builders are choosing to go higher. You know, we do see the R70, the R80, the occasional R90 in the attic, but these are the averages, and they're relatively strong averages at that.
Yeah, yeah.
So now changing tides, moving away from the envelope performance and starting to look at the energy performance. So we'll look at energy and envelope, mechanicals, renewables, and operational carbon a little bit later as well. But to start with, I wanted to show what a standard code-built home looks like on average, and then show what a net zero ready home looks like on average. And this just shows the load breakdown to see where this energy is being used. So this is a 2015 notional 936 home, 2,300 square feet, detached home. About 100 gigajoules per year on average is what's being used. About half of that, so 50 gigajoules, goes to space heating. About a quarter is the occupant load, so that's your lighting, appliances. Water heating makes up 20%, and then, you know, a little bit for space cooling as well. If we improve that exact same home, so that detached 2,300 square foot home, and made it into net zero ready, we bring it down to right around 43, 45 gigajoules or so. What's interesting though is that the load distribution changes quite dramatically. Now you can see that occupant load is making up over 50% in this case, and the space heating has gone down to only 25%, and that's not 25 gigajoules because this home is now only 43 gigajoules. So you're looking at just over 10 gigajoules to heat this home. Water heating remains a reasonable load, and then there's space heating, or sorry, space cooling in there as a small load as well. And the new load that comes on board is HRVs and fans. So the ventilation systems are starting to become a load that actually matters on the energy side.
I know, Brett, you've broken this out too further in some of your reports and show what these averages look like for net zero ready multifamily. You know, some of the MER projects you folks have worked on, these multi-unit residential building unit over units. What's even more glaring about those is that the occupant load hits 65 to 70% of the load, and the hot water load is almost the same as the space heating load.
Yeah,
Or bigger.
It can be quite dramatic. We some of our previous reports, we have some representations of that, and I do have a slide as well here that shows not multi-units, but it shows attached homes and compares to the sizes of the larger detached homes, and you can certainly see that occupant load really gets up into that 60%, 70% range in some cases.
That's something.
All right, so in this chart, we're going to look at that total annual energy consumption, and we're going to compare it to the floor area. So on the vertical axis there, we have annual energy consumption in gigajoules per year. Then we have the floor area in meters squared on the horizontal axis, and each dot represents either a detached home with an orange dot, or an attached home, townhouse, row house in the blue dot. So these represent all of the homes in the program, and you do see a bit of a trend line upwards, which you'd expect. You know, a larger home typically uses more energy. I did find it interesting that there's a major cluster right kind of where we'd expect at that 43, 45 gigajoules per year rating. And then obviously the size of the homes is more representative of the Canadian housing stock. Obviously, most are below that 400 meters squared, but still some larger homes that tend to use more energy.
Right. Interesting. Starting to close in on a pure gigajoule rating maybe for net zero. Isn't that interesting?
Potentially. So this slide is actually the one I mentioned. And this shows that the load distribution based on the size of the home. So here you can see we have space heating, occupant load, water heating, space cooling, and ventilation. Each bar represents 100% of the energy used in that type of housing. So that bottom bar represents all of the attached homes we have. Their average is about 2,000 or so square feet, and that's total heated volume, including basements. And then we've broken up the detached homes into three categories. So Those that are below 2,600 square feet, again, total heated volume. Those that are between 2,600 and 4,000, and then those that are above 4,000. So each bar represents 100% of the gigajoules. They do use more energy with the larger home. So that attached home group used on average about 42 gigajoules and up to 62 gigajoules for those larger detached homes. But as Andy mentioned, we're approaching 60%. And if you go even smaller, the MERB units that are, 700, 800, 900 square feet, obviously having an even bigger percentage on the occupant load. But when you do get to the very large homes, that occupant load decreases, and the space heating typically makes up the space.
Right.
So on another energy performance metric we can look at is total energy use intensity. So this is an intensity metric that compares the floor area to the total energy use. So we are considering total energy use with all of the loads, so space heating, cooling, water heating, ventilation, as well as the occupant load, and we're dividing that by the floor area in meters squared, and that gives you what you would call a TUI. Using a box and whisker chart, we can see that climate zone 4 has an average of 0.13 and a relatively tight 25 to 75th percentile box. In climate zone 5, we have a 0.2, climate zone 6, 0.18, and climate zone 7A, a 0.21. So again, similar to the R values, you'd expect an upward trend probably in this because of the colder climates. The only change from that is we see that climate zone 5 is actually slightly higher than climate zone 6. Again, I don't have an exact reason for why that is. My hypothesis would be just that there's different data sets there, different production builders using different methods. So possibly some of the climate zone 5 production builders are using just a different approach than some of the climate zone 6 production builders. And because of their volume, that can make a big change in what these metrics are.
I think it's good though too, on a side note, just, we talk about TUI. I mean, really what we're speaking to here is an absolute energy target, right? And you're going to hear this term across Canada. It already is being looked at by committees working at NRC, is what do absolute targets mean for homes? A TUI, total energy intensity per square foot per, whatever, is very common in the part 3, part 10 world. It's not common in the part 9 world, but I would, just suggest that the builders and the developers, the designers that are doing these net zero homes and abroad, get ready, because total energy or absolute targets is being looked at for our sector. And a lot of this is guided, to Brett's point, by the architecture of the home, by the geometry of the home, the size of the home. So, another 10, 15 years, that this may be one of our new targets to look at. So.
Okay, so then another energy performance metric, the last of the energy performance metrics we'll look at, is energy consumption improvement over the reference house. So similar to that last envelope metric, this compares to a reference house, which represents kind of a code minimum version of the house you're building. This energy, this volume of energy is all of the loads, but except for the occupant load. So you're not looking at the lighting and appliances. You're only looking at the space heating, space cooling, ventilation, and domestic hot water here, and how that compares to the reference house load. So detached homes are represented in orange. Attached homes are represented in blue. Each bar represents a 2% bubble, so a bucket of 2%. And we can see kind of an average coming in on the energy side around 55 to upwards of 70 on detached homes. And some as high as 85, but getting close to 90% better, but obviously very few. And some very low, 30, 40%. And it seems to be that's large in part because of their geometry. Sometimes you have a home that just naturally has an extremely efficient geometry, and therefore the reference house is going to be pretty efficient, meaning it's going to be really hard to get a percent improvement that's too high above that efficient reference house. So wouldn't look too much.
It does get difficult, doesn't it? I don't know if you have that slide. I know you've taken this slide and overlaid it oftentimes with the tiers, right, of the proposed tiered. And it's always fascinating to see how that part of the net zero ready homes fall into 4, some fall over the line into tier 5. But it certainly is, as you start to hit the tier 5 energy targets, improvement of the reference home, it's almost like a J curve. You know, that logarithmic, all of a sudden it just spikes in difficulty to move over into that tier 5 line.
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, for as Andy mentioned, that tier 5 would be 70% on this grouping. So obviously not most homes are finding net zero ready without getting to that mark, but relatively close.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to take a bit of a different approach. We talked about energy, we talked about envelope, and we're finding some trends. We talked about mechanicals and renewable energy, and I wanted to build some potential average homes for some of the provinces that have a large enough data set. And with those average homes, we're going to try and pull some operational carbon emissions information. I know that that's a major topic now, so we can start to see what do these homes potentially deliver on a GHG emissions per year. So the 3 provinces with the most homes are Ontario, BC, and Alberta. They each had enough data that we felt we could pull some archetypes. So I'll start with Ontario, and there's 2 sides to this slide. And again, this is the average home. So I took all the homes and I found out what their average energy use was. That was 47 gigajoules. I took a percent average of their occupant load. It ends up most of those homes use about 50% occupant load. About a quarter is space heating. So that lines up with those energy charts we've seen before. It certainly holds true in Ontario. It's important to note that this average is a sized home is 2,800 square feet. And again, that includes the whole heated area. So I think that's important to consider. When we look at the envelope of this average archetype, it would have a ceiling with R58, a wall R value of R27, a foundation with R23, an air tightness of 1.1, and a percent better envelope of 53. So both of those charts, I think, align quite well with the data we saw before. But now, in order to get to that ultimate target of operational carbon, we need to determine if renewables were added or not. So we wanted to see, should we make this average home in Ontario net zero ready or net zero? And since only 12% of the homes in Ontario used solar and the rest remain net zero ready, we're going to consider this archetype home net zero ready. It's also really important to consider the mechanicals if you want to get an operational carbon estimate, because the mechanicals are what is producing the operational carbon. So here we're taking the top 3 mechanical configurations, starting with space heating and cooling. So the most popular was the air source heat pump plus gas furnace. We also had just nearly 200 homes with an air source heat pump and electric furnace backup. And then we had some homes with a geo exchange system as well. That's only one side of the equation for the mechanicals. There's also the domestic hot water. So for that, we wanted to see, are they using a gas domestic hot water system or an electric configuration? So we have gas represented in orange and electricity, domestic hot water, represented in yellow. So of the air source heat pump plus gas furnace homes, the majority did use a gas domestic hot water, which makes sense. And then the remainder used an electric domestic hot water. So either a conventional tank or a heat pump. Out of the air source heat pump plus electric furnace configurations, most of them used an electric domestic hot water, which to me makes sense. They're probably trying to stay all electric.
All electric, that's right.
And then a small percentage did include the gas domestic hot water. And then last, the third most popular is a geo exchange with the gas domestic hot water. So with that information, we're going to take a look at what the operational carbon might be. So remember on the right side, this is our average spec. This is the home that we built in our heads based on the average. So it's a net zero ready home. It's hybrid heated with an air source heat pump and gas furnace and a gas domestic hot water. And it's about 2,800 square feet. So we're using operational carbon emission factors from Ontario, of course. We need one for natural gas and one for electricity. And these are from Environment Canada's National Inventory Report. So when we take the energy from natural gas and we multiply it by the emission factors, we're getting kilograms CO2 equivalent per year of 630. And when we add the electricity on top of that, that brings us up over 900. So 900 kilograms of CO2 per year for that average net zero ready archetype home that we built. Now we'll compare that to the other provinces and see what those homes look like. So with BC, very similar on the energy and envelope side. Energy is slightly more. Again, these homes are slightly bigger on average, 3,700 square feet. Occupant load goes down slightly, space heating increases slightly. The water heating stayed roughly the same. On the envelope side of things, we saw R56 was the average on the ceiling for the homes in BC, R32 in the walls, R22 in the foundation. Air tightness went slightly higher at 0.87, and the envelope percent improvement was 59%. So now if we look at, are these homes net zero or net zero ready? About an even split in BC with a slight advantage to the net zero ready. So for this archetype, we're going to consider it net zero ready. Now we need to look at the mechanical systems for these British Columbia homes. The most popular three were the air source heat pump plus electric furnace, then the air source heat pump plus baseboards, and then with combination domestic hot water systems made up the remaining few. So no surprise, most of the air source heat pump plus electric furnace, actually all of those homes stayed all electric and used some type of electric domestic hot water. The air source heat pump plus baseboard homes were about 60-40, mostly using electric domestic hot water, the remainder using gas. And the combo domestic hot water systems, most of them stuck with gas and the remainder did use an electric system. So for this average BC archetype, it's going to be net zero ready with an air source heat pump plus an electric furnace plus an electric domestic hot water system. And it's on average 3,700 square feet of total heated volume. And remember, when we look at the operational carbon, we're now switching to British Columbia's emissions factor, still from the National Inventory Report, but using their provincial utility data. And since there's no natural gas, this net zero ready home used only electricity, and it comes to 238 kilograms of CO2 per year on average. So that's interesting, quite a bit less than Ontario. Large in part because there is no natural gas being used in this particular home.
Yeah. The other thing too, I think we have to keep in mind is there's a lot of policy movements afoot that have affected those homes. Some of the projects that we've worked on in British Columbia, you have city centers like Vancouver and others where, you know, there's either surcharges to gas or there's incentives to electrify. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's just, it's very different scenario, isn't it? And you can see how that policy does impact, for better or for worse, what gets built. So
no, absolutely. And there's more talks about policies making changes in a variety of fields. And what I think is most interesting, and I'll show a slide about this later, is we're seeing a variety of operational carbon, but the homes are really the same. Right now I have the third set of energy and envelope data, and it looks very similar to what was built in BC and Alberta. So all these builders are doing really, really great things, very similar things to achieve net zero ready, but the ultimate carbon decision is out of their hand. That's really in the hands of the utility,
the grid,
and it's estimates too, right? Day to day, hour to hour, those are going to change. Throughout the life cycle of these homes, these are going to change. This is just 1 year. In fact, it's the year 2020 because the data comes out a couple of years later. So doesn't mean that these homes are going to produce that much every single year for 100 years.
That's right. It's interesting. Some of the questions that are going to be discussed at the upcoming spring training camp is, what kind of grid should we be designing homes for? What is the grid of the future? Alberta is, 3 years ahead of schedule, decarbonizing. Their coal plants are now shut down or 3 years ahead. Ontario's down, the others are moving down. Should we be planning based on what's now or what is going to be within 20 years is really important. All to say though, it's still operational carbon is still an important thing. So yeah, no, absolutely. And this is good information to look at. And when it comes to codifying the information, it's really tough and really tricky. So I'm glad that's not my job. So again, looking at energy and envelope for this time for Alberta. This group of homes was right in the middle, around 3,000 square feet nearly, 49 gigajoules on average. Space heating increased. Remember, in Alberta, we have colder climate zones. Most of these homes are in Calgary and Alberta, which is climate zone 7A, so colder than the Ontario and BC homes on average. And that's reflected a little bit in their R values, so slightly higher R values. Air tightness, again, right around 1, and the envelope improvement, very similar, right in the high 50s. So interestingly, and this maybe is a nod to the policy discussion, in Alberta, 78% of the homes actually went full net zero and only 22% went net zero ready. On the mechanicals side of things, we have the top 3 most popular mechanicals were an air source heat pump plus electric furnace, combo domestic hot water, and then the air source heat pump plus baseboard. When we add in the gas domestic hot water, when we add in the electric domestic hot water, that makes up 100% for that air source heat pump plus electric furnace home, which makes sense. I imagine those 31 homes were looking to go all electric. On the combo domestic hot water system, 100% kept the gas, and on the air source heat pump plus baseboards, 100% of those kept the all electric approach. So for this archetype home, we're going to take a full net zero home from Alberta that has an air source heat pump plus electric furnace backup, all electric. So the domestic hot water is electric as well. And that home is just shy of 3,000 square feet. Again, switching to the operational carbon emissions of Alberta in 2020. That's right.
And this will have come down a little bit, and it's supposed to come down further in years to come. But what's also interesting about this home is that it is all electric and it is fully net zero. So even though it's in the high 7,000 kilograms of CO2 per year on its consumption, when you take into account its offset from being fully net zero, that brings that home down to zero on the operational carbon emission side when considering those carbon emissions. So I thought it was quite interesting to see that we're seeing a lot of the Alberta homes going net zero all electric.
And that's a very hard nut to crack, right? And because right now, like you mentioned, let's just stay on this point for just a minute. In Alberta, because of the grid, there is, coal is now sort of out of the picture, recently out. However, the grid compared to other provinces, a couple of other provinces is fairly unclean. There's a lot of fossil fuels. So it is what it is, which is fine. But if you take homes and you just move them to heat pumps and make them net zero ready, what happens is your grid emission, your actual CO2 emissions go up versus just having a nice little natural gas furnace just sipping away out of a 1/2-inch line, right? And what we're seeing, at least the projects we've seen in Alberta, the reason they go all electric, and how they decrease that is they actually add the solar, because it's actually generating your own electricity, which is now clean, that brings your carbon back down. And that's, the other little anomaly we found was, believe it or not, with the prices of electricity and gas, in Alberta, we have seen projects where it is more cost effective to go solar and all electric in Alberta than it is in Ontario for the homeowner.
Oh, wow. Oh,
So there's
very
some
interesting.
strange things happening. But anyways, all to say, you know, again, we're designing homes today based on things that are happening on the grid now at prices and complexities of energy that we have now. But what about 10 years down the road? Because that's the homes are built today, but they're going to last 30 to 50 years, right? So that's very cool. I think as someone asked, we've had questions, you know, Brett, you and I both, we have some on the chat, you know, well, why are we doing net zero with gas and all that kind of a thing, you know, and just one of the questions, you know, I like, you know, Dan Vivian's on here. Dan's a great engineer, does a lot of work, you know, he says, explain to me how you can be net zero and have gas, right? Like, I get it. And those are really good questions that we're all going to have to think hard about it. But I think what we're seeing here is that right now the industry is responding to consumers that are a little cautious. They want to do net zero, but they also don't want to see an increase in their operational cost. You're also seeing some results here where these are homes being built in communities. And what happens is if you build a community in some areas in Canada and you electrify it, you don't have inexpensive gas subsidized to do the infrastructure anymore. And that adds cost to the consumer. So there's some real complexities that we've got to figure out yet before we can make the consumers go, yeah, let's do this thing. Let's electrify. But
yeah, no, absolutely. So many decisions that are, you know, outside the decisions made in the design room that really affect what is going to come of the home. So the last kind of operational carbon slide, just comparing side by side again, snapshot in time. The main reason we're looking at this is just to compare. We have these homes that are built the same, right around 45, 50 gigajoules, really good envelopes, but operationally that's in the utilities hands. So and things will likely change as the years progress. So these are the three provinces we just looked at. These are the other provinces that we have homes in. And I would also note that this is only the energy consumed. It's not considering the offsets from solar. And if particularly when you look at Alberta, 78% of those homes did install solar. So if I was considering the offsets and the average of all these homes, that would come down dramatically. But it's certainly interesting to look at how the provinces differ on their emission factors.
I think it's also good just to point out again that as much as the grid is causing some complexities around the carbon conversation of, you know, solar, no solar, electrification versus gas, we need to remember that still the basic building science that we know as Canadians, in other words, you know, making a home more airtight. Making a home more airtight today, going from code levels to net zero levels. So, you know, 3 to 4 to 1.5 to 1 in a standard home can be 25 tons of carbon over the 30-year lifespan. It doesn't matter whether it's electric or gas. It's a big decrease in carbon, period. So again, we have, you know, get back to those basics. Better insulated envelopes, still reduce carbon, whether it's electrical or not. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you do those things to the envelope, that's what lasts the life of the home, right? They might make at 15, 20 years, might change the mechanicals, make different fuel decisions, but the envelope is what really lasts throughout the longest.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the fuel decision one, Brett, we have seen a number of builders doing net zero ready communities here in Canada. When they do the let's say the focus groups with the consumers that are going to buy in the area. There is a number of Canadians that are concerned about living in all electrified homes because there's been a history of, you know, some grid issues. They think of heat pumps as the old heat pumps we used to know of. And they also want some resilience. What happens if the grid goes down? You know, little gas is resilient. I can run my fireplace. That type of thing. Run a generator, which can run the furnace, that type of thing. So that's one of the reasons why net zero ready with dual fuel has been made in some cases. But again, those same homes are prepared for the future. In most cases, those homes, even when the picture changes, they can still use the air source heat pump for most of the time to heat the home, if not all of it. but it leaves that decision to the homeowner for now.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a reminder that the 2022 full report is going to be published shortly here in April, and it's available to members for download, and non-members can purchase it as well on our website. So that'll be coming here soon.
Very good.
Changing tides, I wanted to have a little discussion with Andy about what the industry challenges will be ahead as we seem to be moving from a voluntary approach to a codified approach in the future. So what are the challenges to get to net zero ready level codes? And in our book, there's a few of them. I'm just going to go over kind of 4 topics that we see are challenges ahead. So the first is small technical details with big impacts. So this has a lot to do with modeling assumptions. What happens on the back end to create these thresholds means that there's real changes in the industry that need to happen. So some examples of that are things like managing the solar heat gain coefficient so it doesn't contribute to overheating, right? On the solar heat gain, we have a potential energy saver, but we have a comfort issue potential and a life safety issue potential as well. On the air tightness side of things, the air tightness testing reference house assumptions is currently overstated, and therefore the prescriptive requirements can be penalized. And on the building science side of things, so there's building science risk factors, of course, associated with higher performing buildings when they're not done correctly. So obviously window detailing challenges in high performance walls. Ventilation becomes a major factor, and these tighter high performance envelopes and balancing ventilation systems isn't quite as well understood in some cases. And increased air tightness, non-optimal ventilation has the potential to increase IAQ risks such as radon. We talk about building tight and ventilating right. If that's not done, you can have indoor air quality issues. So that can be a factor. Third and fourth here. So the third industry challenge is high performance HVAC requires high performance design. So you can't have a high performance building envelope without a high performance mechanical system. And if you do, you potentially get oversized mechanicals, which obviously have risks like short cycling, humidity issues, general discomfort for occupants. We do have F280, which is our heat gain heat loss in Canada, but it's not being uniformed, or it's not being used uniformly across the entire country, which segues to the next point, just about the building officials and builders across the country aren't widely using 936, or building officials aren't widely using the performance or the prescriptive requirements in 936, and some provinces are only starting to enforce MBC 2015 in 936. So that's just an example of, we have a ton of different levels of experience of performance codes across the country and the different provinces. So certainly some solutions that we feel the net zero labeling program in particular can help with. That's industry education is a big one. Obviously, we're helping builders, energy advisors, industry stakeholders to increase their level and get used to building high performance homes. On the optimization side, they're learning before it's mandatory, they're learning at a voluntary scale how to optimize their buildings, what makes sense for them in their specific region, in their climate zone, in their supply chain, and with the stakeholders that are available to them, what's the best approach to get to net zero ready. And we also have new indoor air quality guidelines that I'll talk about in a little bit that help to address potential issues on the IAQ slide. So, nice. Andy, I don't know, do you have anything to add on some of the industry challenges?
No, I don't. Those are all good. I will just say, I think it's going to be good when your report comes out that folks take a look at that. All those challenges, the right sizing of systems, the appropriate mechanical design, working with the building, departments, all that kind of a thing are really big, still ongoing concerns. So.
Great. So I'm going to change tides a little bit. I know we have a lot of qualified participants, qualified net zero participants on the call, builders, renovators. So I just wanted to take a second to provide a reminder about our version 1.4 update. And that took place January 1, 2023. So it's been published. We had bulletins and reminders that went out, but I just wanted to send a reminder here, particularly about two of the bigger changes in that version 1.4 update, both of which are being implemented in a phased approach, which is a bit unique. So I just wanted to explain that to everyone on the call if they're not familiar already. So we did introduce an indoor air quality checklist, and as mentioned, it is being introduced in a phased approach. What that means is that it's optional for compliance this year in 2023. And enrollments in 2024 and onward, it will be mandatory to complete the IAQ checklist. So you can download the checklist from chba.ca/NZ program requirements, which is right where you get the rest of the technical requirements to dig into the details. I won't cover that now. High level, it uses a pick list approach. So you need to obtain 6 points of roughly 25 or so points. And it just sets a threshold, a baseline of good indoor air quality in these homes. And that was brought about from direction of our Net Zero Council. We put together a working group to develop that. And it was ultimately approved by our management committee and our technical committee. And then our builders were surveyed to develop what the stringency level would be, what that first threshold would be. And at 6 points, we feel it's very attainable, and many builders would already be achieving this. Things like MERV 8 filters minimum, more points for higher levels of filtration. Things like low VOC paints and low VOC materials in the home are accredited points to get to compliance of the IAQ checklist. So certainly not too difficult to achieve, but it sets a baseline, and it actually does let builders market themselves if they would like to show potential homeowners that, hey, I achieved 15 of 25 points, or I achieved much higher, if that's of interest. So that's the IAQ checklist, optional this year and mandatory in 2024.
Good.
On the envelope side, something Andy mentioned and I mentioned early, a comparison between that space heating load and that gross space heat loss. So this is the slide I was mentioning. So the second big change is that our program, again, in a phased approach, is changing our building envelope performance target. And that's because we're changing metrics from the old space heating load to the new gross space heat loss load. And I'll explain why that is in a second. First, we'll look at the dates. So 2023 till the end of the year. It's optional to comply with either target. So you can comply with the existing minimum threshold of 33% over the reference house when using the space heating load, and 25% improvement over the reference house using gross space heat loss. And we'll talk about why those metrics aren't the exact same number in a second here. Next year, enrollments in 2024, compliance will be achieved using 30% and only the gross space heat loss metric. Again, version 1.4 technical requirements is available on chba.ca/NZ program requirements. So why the envelope upgrade, or why the envelope update? Why the change to the different metric? Well, there's a few reasons. One of them is that it reduces workload for energy advisors, and that reduced workload means savings for builders and ultimately home buyers. So the reason it reduces the workload for EAs is because in order to get the space heating load metric and to ensure the home exceeded 33%, EAs needed to bring the information out into an external workbook and do a manual calculation. Now, because of where the codes are going, HOT 2000, the modeling software, has made an automatic output for gross space heat loss. So that's why we feel it's appropriate, or one of a few reasons we feel it's appropriate, a time saver, a cost saver, to merge to gross space heat loss, again, in a phased approach, so that everyone can do it at their own speed and is ready to do so. So that's the alignment with the other industry metrics. Obviously, as the codes start to adopt this, it's going to become the norm. We want to make sure we align with the norms. Also, arguments to be made that the gross space heat loss metric can be a truer metric if we're looking at just measuring the envelope efficiency. So that's always positive. And you'll note that we started with 33% for space heating, and we didn't use 33% for gross space heat loss. And the reason for that is because it's not a lateral comparison. And you can see that in this chart on the right, which shows the same homes represented with gross space heat loss in orange, and those exact same homes with space heating energy load. And you can see they're not the same. Gross space heat loss trends a little bit lower, but it's certainly not lateral. So by not lateral, I mean that a home that achieves 50% on space heating energy load won't necessarily achieve exactly 40% on gross space heat loss. It does differ based on orientation and a number of other things. So for that reason, we did a pretty detailed analysis, used some information from Enercan's analysis as well. And we found that 33% aligned somewhere in between 24, 23, and 33%. And for that reason, we felt that since we're not trying to increase the stringency necessarily, we're just trying to maintain stringency and move to another threshold, we would use a phased approach. So starting with 25% this year in 2023, and moving to 33 or to 30% gross space heat loss in 2024. So a little bit of time to get used to that metric change, time saver for energy advisors. And remember, from the data before, most builders aren't just passing the threshold, they're getting into the 45, 55% envelope. So we don't expect too many issues there, and there's certainly lots of time to understand if homes are passing or not. I'll just take, did you have a question on that or anything, Andy?
No, we got lots of questions though, Brett. We're gonna have to do rapid round. Okay,
sounds good. Well, I'll just take 30 seconds to tell anyone interested where they can find us. So our website for industry, chba.ca/NZE. You can find out things like how to become qualified, how many homes have we labeled, what are the training dates, fees, how to label your home, etc. If you want to see builders and renovators that have already done this, or maybe you want to do it and start to get marketed to homeowners, this is our consumer-facing webpage, netzerohome.com. It shows all the builders and renovators across the country.
And note over in the chat, we've placed those links directly in there. You can go over and take a quick note of them. All right, we've got a poll question here to ask you folks. Go ahead and roll the poll there, Stacy. So the question we're going to ask you folks is, do you plan to build a net zero ready home? So one of the questions is, with these tiered codes coming up, are you planning to yourself? Are you planning to do it as a demonstration home, as a builder? Are you building communities of net zero? Give us a sense of where you are with these net zero ready projects. Lots of folks within the next year. That's a good sign for the building industry. We've got a couple that said, I'll wait for codes to mandate net zero ready. Yeah, well, that's coming. You're going to have till probably about 2030. So give yourself about a 7-year runway. Very good. All right. Thank you, folks, very much. Those are good results. So there you go, Brett. It looks like most folks are at yes within the next year. Many already have.
Perfect. So, well, good. Great to see. Well, that's all I had today. So why don't we go into some questions?
Sure. All right, let's run some questions real quick. So Brett, if you're okay, I'm going to take some of these too. We'll move through them quickly because we do have a lot. So I'm going to start at the bottom of the list. We had a question about, our building codes moving to net zero? The answer is they're moving towards net zero ready. So that's a difference. Net zero purports that we're generating, whereas we're just lowering the load to where the home is ready. So yeah, and where does that sit? Net zero ready arguably is tier 4, sort of tier 4, tier 5, the new tier building code. The provinces and territories, from what we understand, are legally obligated to move that direction by 2030 to 2035. So it's time to get ready. We had a comment here, Steve Hope. This is an interesting one. We just had a call this morning, actually, with some folks at Enercan on this. Steve, if folks you want to read Steve's question, it's coming up on a lot of net zero projects, all electric with air handlers, with hot water being electrified. They're trying to build these communities, and the electrical companies are telling them, hold on, we're going to require you to have 400 amp service. Like that's $5 to $6 grand per home. So there are some real complexities here. So Steve, just to answer your question, yes, lots of areas are having this issue, and it's not just Ontario, it's many of the other provinces. The other answer is yes, there are solutions to this. Depending on who the engineer that's doing the numbers at the electrical firm, you'll get different answers. But one thing that you can do, Steve, I'm going to assume, let's say you're in Ontario, or even some of the other provinces, is if you can show a year's worth of data from your home, and you can apply, then what they'll do is they'll actually look at your peaks, and you might not have to upgrade to a 400 amp panel with the addition of the PV. But again, it is a big deal. Jesse's got a question. If you want to try that one, Brett, net zero homes, do you have any numbers for emissions, impact of over generating in the summer, under generating in the winter? Winter consumption can be high. Just statement emphasis should be on efficiency first versus giant solar arrays. Brett?
So that's we have our envelope, kind of our efficiency first approach, which is why we encourage builders to use less energy first. At least the envelope has to be 33% better than the reference house, and then that brings their energy down, so they aren't just putting a massive solar array on a leaky old home. We also have minimum thresholds in all categories of technical requirements. So our values, efficiencies of furnaces and things like that, those are above code, but not by too much. So we do allow for the performance approach. Did that answer that? Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. Dwayne has a question. Is there a plan? I'm guessing Dwayne's asking CHBA. I know the code has a plan for this. CHBA on the volunteer program side, is there a plan to account for carbon footprint of the building's components?
At this point, we're interested and just measuring. We at our last net zero council meeting, we encouraged builders to use the embodied carbon tools like MC squared. But we're not at a point where we're ready to mandate that. We're still at a learning curve, and I think builders are too. Many of the builders that are building these net zero and net zero ready homes are also looking at their carbon emissions on the side. But right now, the technical requirements are looking at energy, but all sorts of work going on behind the scenes to see what's coming down the pipe.
So to just answer that question that was asked, the building codes, we do know that by 2025, operational carbon, it appears, will be in the National Building Code at 2025, 2030, embodied and carbon and resiliency. And if you are interested in what builders are doing, or what even some net zero builders are doing, even though the program doesn't require it, go to our website. We've got multiple webinars that have been recorded from the same series, where builders actually show how they're reducing the carbon, both on the embodied material side and on the operational side. I know that last question disappeared. I don't know if I can find it now. But they also mentioned, what about mechanicals and renewables? Go listen to some of the other webinars. I will encourage you to, look and listen to Chris Magwood, look at some of the work Chris and the team at Rocky Mountain Institute are doing, pay attention to some of the work that the elite team at Enercan is doing with the MCE tool. And I'll just throw this one out there. Be very cautious about making quick decisions around embodied carbon on solar panels and embodied carbon on renewables, because one of the concerns has come up is that if we are going to account for embodied carbon on solar, we probably should be accounting for the embodied carbon that is going to be the cement for all the new nuclear generation plants too. So just saying, but again, there are some other discussions going on. Real quick, the question here is, how is carbon calculated when a home is using only solar? I don't know, Brett, if you want to speak to that.
So we've just used one-to-one credits with net metering. So when we look at the operational carbon emissions, again, we don't have thresholds for that. This is just informational. But when we look at the operational carbon emissions of like an all-electric net zero home, like we did for that Alberta column, we would just use a one-to-one credit, saying that we're offsetting 100% of that energy, so we can bring that down to zero.
Nice, nice. I just want to note too on this conversation, the question about the grid and the 400 amp panels, there's sort of a nice little scenario. Jesse Tufts noted over in the chat. You can do that. You just have to be really careful of your numbers, the equipment you choose, ramp up loads, all that kind of a thing. Robert Weatherseed, question here, Brett. What are the window specs? Did you notice anything about the window specs for net zero homes in Ontario? I'm wondering, you know, Robert, if it's a question about whether it's double versus triple, or does it go deeper than that? Does your full report tell more than that, Brett?
We don't have too much info. I don't think we have a window section this year. And the reason is because with the Hot 2000 files, you don't get all the information. So it's not worth a whole lot. I do know that in Ontario, we're seeing a lot of low solar gain windows. And Andy, maybe you can expand on what you're seeing with builder spec specifically in Ontario.
Yeah, in Ontario, we are seeing a lot of tri-pane. And again, because there is a lot more glass in a lot of homes, large and small, and they're not just doing it to meet net zero. That's the thing we need to understand, is they're not just doing the tri-pane to get to the gigajoules. They're understanding that you now have glass that is warmer, so you can sit next to it in the wintertime and you don't get condensation on it. The other thing too, folks, is I think you're going to see some pretty aggressive window performance changes in the next 2 to 3 years. We're going to start to see windows that, you know, have 0.8 U values. So again, right now we're seeing a lot of tri-pane. We have seen some multifamily projects that use double pane for net zero ready. But again, typically in those scenarios, you've got smaller window to wall ratios. So yeah. But I would say U values are probably closer to, on the average, 1.2 or less. Solar heat gain mid-range 0.3 or so. Here's a question for you, Brett. The Mark asks, of the net zero ready homes that have electric space heating, so air source, ground source, electric baseboard, is gas water heating being utilized? And if so, what's the proportion? That's a deep dive.
We have, yes, a small proportion, it seems, based on the data. I don't have the, obviously don't have the exact numbers yet, but that would be in the report. So some of them are, most of them that are electing to go all electric on their space heating side of things seem to not bring the gas line in. And go with a gas, go with an electric type water heater.
Well, I'll tell you one scenario we've seen at Brett, just an answer, is when you have homes that are not on traditionally serviced projects. So there is no gas in the area. And in some of those cases, they may do the hot water with propane. You know, but anyways, that's one other scenario. Question here is from Grant: net zero mechanical stats, the regionalized stats, air source heat pumps plus gas in Ontario, air source heat pump plus electric in Alberta as a cheaper backup source. Any thoughts on that? Do you see a difference?
I think a lot of those decision-making processes have to do with kind of that policy discussion that Andy had earlier on. So I mean, obviously, in some cases, in all cases, the operational cost is a factor. But Andy was mentioning that that all electric net zero home can, in some cases, be a cheaper option. Obviously, there's an upfront investment there, but yeah, so it's definitely different in province to province, price to price. Huge variability.
Okay. Thomas Tran had a question. I'll answer that one quick. It's a great question, Thomas. We did mention combos. Brett had in the space heating side combo systems. And of course, a combo is a single device like a tankless or otherwise that heats hot water, and you use the hot water for space conditioning, heating, and you also use it for domestic. So Thomas, to answer it more specifically, those are combos. I believe you're quite familiar with them, Thomas. And to be part of the net zero program, they do have to be P9 certified. So they have to come with a CSA testing protocol that gives them a total performance factor or thermal performance factor for both the space heating and the domestic hot water efficiency. Here's some other ones. What question? Dave McCauley says, how do you measure the occupant impact on net zero? That's the magic question.
That's a really good question. So our program is based is a modeled based program. So we're not measuring net zero after 1 year or after 2 years in the home. We're measuring net zero as modeled. And the modeling in EnerGuide and in HOT 2000 uses the occupant load as an estimated average. That's they estimate three humans, three people home 50% of the time, and they have some calculations and estimations to come up with that. That comes up to about 25 gigajoules per year. And we want to make sure that is as true as possible. So we want to make sure we redo those calculations regularly. So we're hoping to start a project to support that shortly and then make sure that 25 gigajoules is as accurate as possible. Obviously, it's an average, and it's going to be most people aren't average. So you're going to have homes that exceed that and go below that. And the reason we decided to go with a modeled rather than an actual is because we want to sell net zero and net zero ready homes, not net zero homeowners. So the home maintains its label throughout the life of the home. It can get resold and still maintain its label. Obviously, homeowners, if they're looking for zero electricity bills or zero utility bills, they're going to have to go beyond just the label. They're going to have to absolutely make sure they're not they're average or below, and they're not plugging in a hot tub or a couple hot tubs, that type of thing.
You know, David, the occupant load has gotten to be such a big thing that in essence, the new tiered energy code has had to sort of ignore it. And someone else on the question said, what is the occupant load? So it is all the loads in the home that are occupant driven. So the operational loads are the things that we can sort of control. It's the heat loss, the heat gain, it's the space conditioning, the heating, the cooling, the ventilation, and domestic hot water. It's all the other things on the appliance side, whether you have Xboxes, beer fridges, you name it, the homeowner putting a hot tub in, all of a sudden that becomes occupant load. And you know, to David's point, it's 50 to 60%, like Brett showed, of the total load. The builder or developer can't control that, but it is really something that we do have to key in on, because really what it comes down to is you can have a net zero home built for you, but do you drive it like a net zero home? It's you and I. So there are ways to help occupants with some of this. Every net zero ready home, net zero ready or net zero, requires the home has to have a energy monitoring capability. So these homeowners are given the ability to look at their real-time energy use. And that's one of the reasons the program requires it, is because people have to understand that driving your home and how you drive it is as important, if not more, than even how it's built in some cases. There's a question John asked, maybe I might be able to answer that. About the incremental cost. It varies. It depends whether you're in a cold climate zone or a warm climate zone. It depends if you're in a province like BC where the base building code is higher, or you're in Alberta where it's a little lower, or Ontario where it's in between. But John, I'll put my thumb in the air and go, we have seen a single detached in some of the areas. It costs $20,000 to $25,000 hard cost to go from code to net zero ready. And then it costs another 30 grand to go full net zero because of the solar panels. On a multifamily, you're probably around 8 to 10 hard costs to go net zero ready. And again, add another 20 to 30 for the solar panels to go full net zero. But it's all over the map. Brett, say whatever you're comfortable saying is CHBA on that, if you have any thoughts.
No, that was pretty good. That pretty much covered what I would have said. You just did it in maybe a quarter of the time. So that was good.
The quick question from Dan, and some of the good questions, I don't know if we'll get to all of them. If the house uses solar, does the grid carbon content matter?
So we're looking at only energy right now. It depends what you're looking at. If you're just looking at the net zero label threshold, no, we're looking at energy. Many of our builders aren't just looking at our net zero threshold. They want to build a low carbon home. They want to build a resilient home. So to them, I would say it does matter.
That's right. Yeah. Good. Paul, good question. Paul DeBartis from ResCon. Good to have you on, Paul. Your question about standardized occupant loads, you know, is it realistic to have the same load from a 2-bedroom to a 5? The answer is probably not. Problem is, that's the way we've done it with Canadian codes now for about 40 to 50 years, right? And Back then, the occupant load wasn't a big deal because we had big 150K boilers in our basement heating the outdoors. Well, now it is a big deal because the biggest load is that occupant. So, to your point, it's time to rethink that. The good news is CHBA has been doing a lot of monitoring of all these net zero homes, and there's data that's going back to NRCan, back to the teams that are re-looking at some of the occupant loads, maybe what should be carried and thoughtfully used. And on another note, just more technical, I see there's lots of energy advisors. Just a reminder that when you do your energy models, you're also given direction that whether the building is a MERB or whether it is a single, there are different considerations. There's different load considerations from the occupant standpoint. Again, to Paul's point, because it's a different form, fewer bedrooms, considered to be fewer occupants. Lots to figure out. The last question we got today, and then we're going to wrap it up. Dan Vivian, it was the first question that went up here, and it was more of a philosophical question, and I love it, was how can a heat pump with natural gas backup be net zero? And it is a good question, right? Like, this is something I think we all have to ask ourselves. But for right now, net zero ready. Again, when we look at the tiered codes that talk about, net zero ready, it's not net zero, it's net zero. The tiered codes were not built around lowering carbon emissions at all. It was simply built around the fact of lowering the energy. So, love the work you're doing, love what you found. But again, it's one of those things, we're going to get there yet, and it's folks like you that push us that direction. So Brett, I'm going to have you just close your screen. I'm going to go back and share mine. We're ready to sort of wrap things up here on my presentation. Just got a couple things we do want to share with you folks before we end the session. I know we are at 2:30 now. We do have a building science digest that does go out, and I've had some people ask me, Andy, where can we find this? So if you go to our website, you can sign up for it. It comes out every about 4 to 5 times a year. It's got articles from building science writers all over the world, and it's specific to Part 9 residential housing. We don't get into glass curtain walls, but man, we'll talk about air leakage. We'll talk about mechanical design and low-rise housing. The next couple sessions coming up, folks, we've got a good one. Not all heat pumps are created equal. Gord and a couple of guests are going to join him, and they're going to talk about, there's some cool tools out there now where you can properly select an air source heat pump, because that little rating you're given, COP or HSPF doesn't tell you even half the story. So how do you select good heat pumps that will actually perform in the home? The other one too coming up is we're going to do an energy code cost takedown. We've got 2 builders that have costed their way to some of the new tiers of the building code, including the new proposed tiers in Ontario. They're going to share some of the costs that they've learned, and they're using the new cost building assessment tool platform that NRCan developed. So we're going to put them head to head and come prepared to ask them questions. So for that session, we're going to have, it's going to be Jeff Fung from Forever Homes, and is going to join us for that one. And then we're going to have a session 2. We're going to have Jeremy Marshall from Corsica is going to join us. So it's good to have you folks this afternoon. Have an excellent Thursday. Brett, thank you for your help today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. And folks, remember CHBA, the report's going to be coming out where all this information comes from. You can do a deeper dive. Continue to send some questions to Brett. And the rest of you enjoy the rest of your Thursday afternoon. And I'll just simply say thanks to Enbridge again for supporting the time and the resources and everyone's effort that goes into to sharing things like this. Have a good day, folks.